What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast outside at 29's Kitchen Bar, the Golf Dome, the Whirly Golf Dome right behind us. We got an awesome show set for you tonight. We're going to get into a bunch of different conversations. We got Ryan Talbot in the house. I am Matt Parrino. Special guest, best hair in Buffalo, media, Nate Geary.
Are you not in media anymore?
I am in media, but I'm trying to show a little bit of, I'm trying to be humble.
Humble. That's a good look for you, honestly, the humble. But your hair is much, much better. It's tethered. It's looking good. I came here. I actually had to get a haircut. I scheduled a haircut before I got here, knowing what I was going to be up against. So
what time was the cut?
And clearly it was Talbot. That's what I was up against.
That's right.
Listen, nobody shaves the dome like Ryan Talbot. I'll tell you that right now. And nobody arrives conveniently after everything is set up at our live shows like Ryan Talbot.
Perfect as usual on our end.
What's up, buddy? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here. What an amazing setup outside. We have some, life-size Pong. We have some Connect 4, Jenga, fire pits, you name it. Great setup here.
So outside here on the patio at 29's, they just set up this entire turf situation. They got some Connect 4 going over there, which I think I called tic-tac-toe in the preview video, so apologies about that. They've done a great job here, and actually, go ahead.
Who are you apologizing to? Are there Connect 4 enthusiasts out there that are like, called it tic-tac-toe?
There are. I had a couple comments on the Instagram post. They were like, it's Connect 4, guy. So that's my bad. But it's super cool. And Nate, you were talking about it before we started. You come up here all the time to hit in the winter, and you didn't even know this patio was out here. It's awesome.
I had no idea. Yeah, I'm here like 2-3 times a week in the wintertime. Apparently I've got you to worry about for next year for the Buffalo Bills Media Golf Tournament. I had no idea. It wasn't very talked about you doing anything there. So this was a first for me.
So I'll get a picture. And it's a picture of me, a couple other gentlemen. We're holding this thing called a trophy. That was what we got to get when we won the Media Golf Tournament last year, which you conveniently didn't show up for. And I think it was because we might have been at the Whirly Golf Dome and you saw me hitting the driver and you decided to make other plans. Was that what happened?
So it's really weird. You know who won the year before that?
I don't want to talk about that. So let's move right along here. No, they do such a great job here at 29's. Thank you so much to Chuck and all the guys here who set this thing up for us. It is a beautiful venue. It's beautiful inside. And we did a show here a couple months ago. It was inside, getting out on the patio, Ryan. It's amazing. It's a beautiful night. It's a beautiful time to be in Western New York.
Yeah, game changer out here. First day here, it feels like in the Buffalo summer that hasn't been 80s, 90s, overly hot. Perfect temperature to be out on the patio.
So we got a lot to get into today, and I've been actually meaning to have you on the show for a while now because I do like to kind of keep tabs on, of course, the national conversation around the Bills, but also the local conversation. And everybody has a podcast. Everybody has a different take. And I've sensed from you over the last couple of months a little bit of a departure from the, rosy outlook on the Bills and maybe a little bit of a movement towards some concern. So that's where I wanted to kind of start off with. We haven't caught up on the show in a long time. And so where are you at with all the changes this offseason and heading into a very interesting 24? What is your overarching thoughts on what the Bills roster looks like right now and your expectations for this season?
Well, let me make a really good comparison for you really quick. How long have you been going to the same barber for?
Wow. 5 years.
Okay, so a long time. You have a lot of trust in that barber, right?
I trust him with my life.
Imagine one day your barber said, I'm moving to Florida and you got to find a new barber. How would you feel about that?
I'd have my wife start looking at some real estate in Florida, to be honest with you. No, it's funny. You mentioned that little side conversation. I had a barber in Vegas and we were best friends. Like, I didn't know how I was ever going to have another barber again until I found my good buddy, John Perroni. Shout out to him over on Millersport Highway. Does a great job, Perroni Barber Studio. I'll just give a little bit of I got to cut myself today, mister.
Right. So I'm kind of what I'm comparing this to is the Bills are trying out a new hairdo. They're trying out a new barber, right? And I think this year more than ever, there's more unknowns team than there has been since Josh's rookie season. So I think that in terms of like what my optimism or pessimism is for the season, I think a lot of it surrounds with not exactly knowing, but as like we were talking before we started the podcast, like I feel like I'm sitting in this maybe weird camp of not feeling particularly optimistic about where I don't think they've gotten better, but I also, who's going to challenge them in the division? I think last year was Miami's best chance. They took a swing at the king and they missed. They came up, they fell short. And, until the New York Jets do anything of, real consequence, they're the Bills, 7 years ago, except of being a true contender in the division. I can feel maybe not as highly about the Bills this year as I have in years past, and still really like their chances at winning a division and hosting a playoff game or two. So it maybe feels like a little bit of a weird place to be. And I'll say this to Ryan, like off camera, which was, I think maybe this is a unique time for Bills fans to take a step back from the expectations. This conversation about a window, right? This window that the Bills have been in for, the last 4 or 5 years or so. But like, I look at it like this and to say, maybe it's good for everybody to step back, not feel like you're in the spotlight, because I think that's really where the Bills were their best. That's where they made the AFC division or the AFC championship game, when those expectations were, they're a young team with a great young quarterback. Let's see it. And maybe that's where the Bills are sort of returning to. And I think that's maybe good for everybody.
Ryan, the interesting thing for me is like, we talked so much over the last couple of years as the Bills have been trying to kind of break through this threshold, beat the Chiefs. Obviously, that's been the biggest obstacle in their way. But how many years, year after year, are going to continue to do the same thing and expect different results? To me, this offseason, it represents a getting away from what they've been trying to do and trying to imagine this in a different way. And the biggest thing for me, we're obviously going to talk a lot about the wide receivers tonight. We're going to talk about some position groups that maybe have cause for concern or maybe we think might hold the Bills back. But to me, this is a chance for them to reimagine what this offense can be like. And we talked about it on the show a couple days ago. They really haven't done that since 2019.
No, absolutely not. And listen, change is the word here. And whether you're talking about the roster, whether you're talking about the coaching staff, I mean, we have Joe Brady now as the full-time offensive coordinator. We don't know who's calling the plays on defense. We have some new positional coaches. There's change across the board, but change can be good. Brandon Beane said something about the fact that a lot of the players on this previous roster had all experienced the same heartbreak of 13 seconds of getting so far into a season and then losing games where they thought they were ready against the Bengals, for instance, and just they really didn't show up for a performance like that. So you bring in new guys and you bring in new coaches, and that can change a lot. And we won't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing until after this season is over. But with so many new faces, so many new guys coming in, some guys like a Curtis Samuel, who's never really been on a winning team, that was probably a selling point for him. And there's other guys that have that Super Bowl experience, like an MVS. So it's a good mix of players that they've brought in. But change can be good. They got younger in a lot of areas where they were getting a little bit long in the tooth.
So one of the things is like when you change over a roster like the Bills have done, one of the things that you start to talk about is like, okay, who are the players that could potentially step up and really carry the mantle for some guys that have made their departure? You think about Stephon Diggs on the offensive side, Gabe Davis on the defensive side with Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. But where I want to start this conversation really is like, where is somewhere on this roster, whether it be a position group or a player, where you think that could be a spot where that potentially holds the Bills back? And we kind of bantied a couple of things around. Where did you land, Nate?
It feels like I'm picking some low-lying fruit here, but it's probably the wide receiver room. I just think there are so many unknowns. We know that Curtis Samuel is a good replacement level receiver, been largely a number 3, maybe elevated to a number 2 in the most of the places he's been over the course of his career. Ironically, right, his best season was with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. So I think there is some maybe background understanding of the system, and there's obviously an underlying level of success they've had together. So I think that should bring a level of maybe some optimism to the room. But I think a lot of where my optimism about the wide receiver room, at least to start the offseason, was Curtis Samuel and Stephon Diggs. I'm like, that seems like that with Khalil Shakir. Like, it just felt like that looked like it could be something. And hey, go and draft the Gabe Davis replacement. I don't know that I had, if I predicted, could anybody have predicted that Stephon Diggs would have been traded this offseason? I know that I spent most of the end of the season and leading up into that trade telling people there was no way that was going to happen. The financial commitment just to make that happen didn't make sense. But here we are a couple months later, and the Bills are ready to start training camp without their number one wide receiver and Josh Allen's number one weapon since his second season in the league, since 2020. So
let me ask you this. Let me just jump in here. If Stephon Diggs was on the roster right now, and we were under 2 weeks out from training camp, knowing what you know about his last 12 weeks last season, would you still call him the Bills' number one wide receiver going into this training camp period?
100%. Listen, I mean, I think it's easy, for a fan to find copium in, hey, I'm going to look at the last couple of games of the season and say he wasn't the same player. And whether that's the scheme driven, whether it's target driven, whether it's him losing a step, I think right now, if you look around the league and you were to take a poll of players, if you were to take a poll of fans in the NFL, Stephon Diggs is probably still considered a top 5, top 7, top 8 receiver. And I think you go back to what he was at the beginning of the season, which was the 3rd or 4th best producing receiver in the NFL. And I think he was banged up a little bit towards the end of the season. I think the offense dramatically changed. And I don't necessarily think those are factors that lead me to believe he has fallen off of some sort of cliff that all of a sudden today in October, he just wasn't Stephon Diggs anymore. And I think that's really where this conversation can get to me a little bit disingenuous about him, which is that the Bills are better off without him. They aren't better off by any stretch of the imagination without Stephon Diggs. They're different, and different can be better. But I think at least initially there is going to be growing pains around what this offense looks like, who it flows through when they're down. I think it's very easy to talk about how the scheme's going to shift. They're going to run the football more. Traditionally, ask Josh Allen maybe not to be 89% of the team's offensive output each and every week, which I think is something I'd like to see them do and not be so dependent on their quarterback. But are they going to find out who this offense runs through in training camp? Probably not. I would think that we don't know, just like there was a dramatic shift in October and November away from Diggs. It's very possible we don't know who this offense runs through until October or November. And my question is can the defense sort of reestablish themselves as the sort of driving force of this roster, this organization? Because early on in Josh Allen's career, that's what it ran through this defense. I've got high hopes that I think this defense is a top 5 unit this year. And I know Ryan's got some concerns about the defensive line and the edge position, and I certainly share those concerns, but I think they've got the best linebacker. I think that they've got 2 outside corners that pound for pound are, a really, and I think they've got the best slot corner in football. So I think if this turns into a team that relies on their defense in the running game, it's going to feel weird with Josh Allen. But I think if they can find their formula to success, that they can be as successful, it's just going to be different.
Brian, why don't you pick up there and talk about the defensive line in general, why you think that is the biggest concern heading into the season?
Yeah, for me, it was the edge position specifically. I think they're pretty good at D tackle. I like the depth that they have there. Edge, they're kind of depending on the expectation that Von Miller returns to form. And listen, it could happen. He could end up being a 6 to 8 sack player, maybe even more than that. But that's a big what if. You're depending on Greg Rousseau to finally have a healthy season. He's played a lot of games, but he's been banged up every year. We learn about these foot injuries and nagged at him. AJ Epinesa looked great last year until the rib injury against KC. So those are guys that you're depending on to play significant reps. And then who is it behind them? Is it Kingsley Jonathan? Is it Dwayne Smoot? There's Javon Solomon. We don't know. There's so much in terms of the unexpected. And you're looking to replace a unit that lost Leonard Floyd, who was highly productive in season. I think that they need to be able to get after the quarterback. And from the outside, I just don't know if they have enough there to do it.
So for me, I'm going to go. So edge rusher has been my biggest concern over the last couple of weeks. We've talked plenty about it on the podcast. I think the wide receiver position is something that just the unknown of it is good place to start. I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten path here and talk about the running back position and specifically James Cook, because this is a guy that last year really took the league by storm. He finished top 5 in rushing last season. You look around the media landscape, and not a lot of people have him as one of the top 10 running backs in the league. So I think around the league, people kind of view the Bills as more by system where the success came from rather than the player itself. But I think Cook's a really good player. I think going into year 3, he has the potential to be really good. My concern is the drops. And if you talk, the great overarching point that you have here is like weapons for Josh Allen. In the passing game, to me, James Cook has to be one of those weapons. And if you get into the season and the drops continue to be a problem, how much big of a concern is that? Is that something that can hamper them if they're going into the season and you're Brandon Beane, if you're Sean McDermott saying, okay, weapon number 1, let's just hypothetically say it's Dalton Kincaid. What if behind closed doors, weapon number 2 is James Cook? Even in the passing game, how can you count on that? And how does that change things if he's not reliable in the passing game?
I think his drops were so meaningful, as I think they stick in a lot of people's minds. I don't know. Do a lot of people remember the Gabe Davis drops? I know there's a couple that I can think of, the one against Tampa Bay that goes off his hands and it's intercepted, right? Gabriel Davis had more drops last year than James Cook, but I don't know that they were in the same situations. They were so meaningful. They were touchdown drops. They were game-winning play drops. I think in the one in Philadelphia, I mean, could have been really the difference of the Bills running away with that game. And I think about the plays he did make, and what he did against Dallas and the plays that he made in the regular season game against Kansas City. And I think to myself, what kept James Cook off of the field 2 years ago, his rookie season? He fumbled on the first play, his first touch as an NFL player. And listen, I mean, we've all been around Sean McDermott long enough. There is trust equity with him that especially early on, it took a long time for James Cook to break that threshold back into a player that McDermott and at the time Ken Dorsey could trust. And I think he answered a lot of those questions this year. He was far more protective of the football, wasn't coughing it up as much. So I think for me is, if that's the area that he improves in by 30% next year, and he goes from having whatever he had, like 7 drops last year, to having 4, having 3, I think that could be a dramatic turn for him. So I also think that the kid they drafted out of Kentucky is going to push him. He's going to get touches. I think Ty Johnson's going to get touches. So I think for me, whether it's right now Thurman Thomas or it's James Cook, this is a committee backfield. This is an organization that has not committed since Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane here to a running back that they have brought into a second contract. I would assume the same happens for James Cook. He's got 2 more years under contract, and that's probably the length he will be here in Buffalo. So as they continue drafting guys, they spend high assets on them, but they don't spend a lot of money to retain them. And the conversation during Hard Knocks that you hear Joe Shane talking about is, well, we've got a $45 million quarterback. We can't afford the $17 million running back. And the Bills are absolutely, they've identified that as a position that feels like a method to their madness. Shane's taking that to New York, and Dan Morgan's taking that to Carolina. They signed Miles Sanders a couple years ago, but then they go out and draft a kid from Texas, and they've got Chuba Hubbard. So it's like, I think that this is an organization that is probably never going to have that true number 1 lead back. And even last year, Ty Johnson and Latavius Murray, I think that their backfield will be significantly better if someone other than Latavius Murray is getting those touches. By the end, it was hard to watch. It was a tough watch at the end.
I'm so glad that you brought up Hard Knocks, because I wanted to bring that up at some point of the show, because it's so interesting to take a regime that is a kind of a spin-off of what the Bills have done here, right? Like, you're going to start to see that around the league. Joe Shane, you're going to see it with Dan Morgan in Carolina. Then eventually you're probably going to see it with Terrence Gray, who, Brian Gay, and whoever you want to kind of use as the next example. And it's funny that Joe Shane kind of didn't take the blueprint that Brandon Beane kind of showed. And he kind of helped with having Tyrod Taylor come in and have an okay season that year that he had. And then the Bills punting on paying him and then going out looking for a quarterback in the draft, doing everything they could to move up in that draft to get a quarterback in a quarterback draft that, okay, Sam Darnold didn't work out. Lamar went late. Baker Mayfield's had his trouble. But there were a bunch of guys in that draft. To me, this year's draft felt like that similarly. Like, we're going to look back on this draft and say, maybe there's one or two guys that are really good in this draft. And Shane and Dable instead chose to pay Daniel Jones, which is now looking like this unbelievable failure and putting in jeopardy their run in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, they're going to probably regret that contract. But to your point, Shane and Dable, they did a lot of board work with these quarterbacks in this draft. They did look. They were saying, maybe we don't have the guy. If the right player falls into our laps, we're going to go that path. Obviously didn't happen that way. We saw some clips too where Shane was talking about maybe trading the pick, when maybe more so joking with Morgan and Bean, but they evaluated all of their options. And right now, you're right. Not following that blueprint, giving that kind of contract to Daniel Jones was a very risky play. And you only have so many years as a GM in this league, and that might be what ends up costing Joe Shane his job in New York.
I think Drew Lock starts more games than Daniel Jones this year.
Drew Lock's got that swagger. Like, he's going to have that locker room going. I mean, another kind of takeaway from, and I don't think we needed Hard Knocks to tell us this, but is there like, I want to be careful how I say this, but like Daniel Jones is like, could you imagine him being your like leader in the locker room? I mean, the guy inspires. No, he has zero juice. The juice level with Daniel Jones, I mean, you got to bring a couple of OJs to the building every day to find any type of juice with that guy leading the organization.
Yeah, listen, I mean, they also have got a parachute to get out of that contract this year. It's why I think Drew Lock ends up playing a lot of football this year, because there's an injury guarantee, and if he sustains another injury, they're paying him next offseason too. So I think for me, I think Drew Lock plays a lot of football. I think that Brian Dable could definitely be in trouble this year if they don't have results. And their roster is really interesting. The trade for Brian Burns, premier pass rusher, they got him at a discount. I mean, they didn't pay what the Rams were reportedly willing to pay, 2 first-round picks. But I think like their roster is weirdly constructed, and Joe Shane's fingertips are all over it too. So it's not like they're walking into a roster that isn't theirs. It's a lot of their guys. It's top heavy. There's not a lot of great depth. And if you're a fantasy football manager, definitely go for Devin Singletary, because he's going to get some carries. He's in my fantasy league, so I don't want to give him my strategies. I don't want to give him my strategies.
Okay. So let me ping pong this around here for a moment. We're going into this weird year for the Bills, transitional year, a lot of new faces. We both predicted 12 wins, which I think is on the high end of what most people are expecting. Say this thing goes off the rails, right? They miss the playoffs. Sean McDermott gets fired. Crazy, right, to think about? But let's take it down that road. The Giants have a lottery pick. I mean, they're the top 5. They have a horrible season. Brian Dable gets fired. Are we on a path to that? If those two things happen, where the Bills bring in Brian Dable, keep Brandon Beane, fire Sean McDermott, bring in Brian Dable to reconnect him with Josh Allen, how far-fetched is that? Let's start with you, Ryan.
I think Sean McDermott getting fired is pretty far-fetched. So that's my first issue with this. But let's say it
missing the playoffs, finishing 3rd in the AFC East with this quarterback, with this roster. You don't think there's any chance? No chance. This is coming from the guy that said no chance Stephon Diggs gets traded. So we might punt on Mr. Middle here.
Oh, man.
But go ahead, Ryan, and then we'll go over to Nate.
No, because, I mean, listen, when you look at this roster, you look at the fact that they moved on from Stephon Diggs, you could say, well, that was a Brandon Beane decision. They paid Von Miller all that money. That's a Brandon Beane decision. If anyone could be on the hot seat, hypothetically, why wouldn't it be Beane more than McDermott? I think Beane's done a phenomenal job. Don't get me wrong. I don't think either are on the hot seat, but the situation plays out like that. I think Dable would at least get an interview because of how close he was to Josh Allen, because of how much Josh Allen loved him as a player. Philosophically, though, does he match up with Joe Brady? Is Joe Brady out the door as well? What happens there, I guess, would be my comment.
I think in that scenario, Joe Brady's out as well. I think Joe Brady and McDermott both are out, and that would be the scenario where it's like, all right, you want to get an offensive head coach. And that's the thing that I always push back on people when they say, fire Sean McDermott, fire Sean McDermott. Okay, who are you hiring if you fire Sean McDermott? To me, Brian Dable would be the kind of guy that with this roster, pairing him with Brandon Beane, who I think has built a pretty solid roster across the board. They developed some guys. Now, the big question is, and why I also always push back on this conversation is like, what happens to the defense? Because now it looks like I'm a big Brian Dable guy, but it looks like that guy is absolutely uninvolved with anything going on the defensive side of the ball based on watching the first 2 episodes of Hard Knocks.
Well, first of all, your scenario, you sound a lot like one of the Twitter guys in our mentions, like, week 1 last year, you like this, just, at Buffalo Bills Mafia fan 2629.
Oh, okay.
42069. That's what it sounds like. I think that there is a better chance that the league folds than Sean McDermott being fired from the Bills. I don't think that there's any chance in hell that it happens. And the reason is, I think that ownership, look at what they're dealing with the Sabres. I think that Terry Pegula is very fortunate to have found 2 guys that work together very well. They're in sync. Their moves, the moves they make are moves that Brandon Beane likes, that Sean McDermott backs. And I think the level of competence that exists in this organization, the respect that teams, other organizations, other fan bases that exists for the Bills are in large part to the consistency that Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have brought. I don't see they could go winless. And let me tell you why. The only reason they go winless is because Josh Allen tears his ACL. God, that was me knocking on wood, right? Like, and then what? Are you going to fire the coach because the quarterback got hurt? That's the only scenario that I see the Bills potentially even having the conversation. I think that the conversation is warranted after the Denver game, after the Giants game. These are warranted conversations. What I started to really, when I started to feel like I needed to have those conversations, I started to tell myself, why am I having these conversations? This is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Sean McDermott is the second safest coach in the NFL behind Sean McVay.
Andy Reid,
maybe. Yeah, I don't see any scenario where Sean McDermott isn't the head coach next year. And I think if you really wanted to say we don't think Sean's the guy that's there, it's Ben Johnson. I mean, that's who you would go with. You'd go with the offensive guy that everybody wants, that nobody can apparently convince to be a head coach. So I don't even know what a situation, a scenario looks like where this would happen. So it's like, for me, I guess I wanted to have the conversation last year, and then I was having it, and I'm like, this feels dumb. This conversation ends with me saying there's no way this is happening, and then it's like, well, why are we even having the conversation if I got to throw the but before I even get to the point?
So for me, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it is interesting, and that's why I want to talk about it. For me, Sean McDermott is going to have the stigma of 13 seconds until he wins the Super Bowl. And we have a recent example. And by the way, I should preface this by saying, I'm not saying Sean McDermott's on the hot seat. I don't think he's going to get fired at the end of the season. I don't think the Bills are going to miss the playoffs. I'm saying recent had a lot of success in the NFL year after year, winning season championships, going to the playoffs, and losing in the playoffs. Marvin Lewis, to me, is the greatest example of where you can get yourself into, as an organization, into a comfortable situation and figure out after a while, okay, we need somebody else to get us over the hump. Now, the Bengals haven't really gotten over the hump. They got to the Super Bowl, right? So that's more than the Bills have done, but they still haven't gotten over the hump. They haven't won the Super Bowl. So I guess my point is, whose organization at the end of a playoff-less year is it? Because Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are in lockstep. They almost feel like a package deal. But at some point, they won't be. At some point, somebody will have to wear the failures, and then it'll be McDermott. That's where I'm feeling, because if you trace this thing back, the number one job that Brandon Beane has had in his job was to find the quarterback, and he found it.
He nailed it.
And so And he's done a really good job day 1, day 2, day 3, and some would argue maybe not as good on day 1, and we can kind of argue that a little bit. But guys that he's found in the draft on day 2 and day 3, they've been developed too, so that part of that goes to Sean McDermott. But I think Brandon Beane has done a pretty good job. I think McDermott did a good job. I'm just saying there's going to come a fork in the road, and I think to your point, maybe Terry Pegula doesn't have the appetite to make this kind of decision, but at what point and at what result do you start to think about going a different direction?
I think you would need 2 bad seasons back to back for that to happen. I just don't see it happening this year, regardless of the result.
All right, there you have it. He's going to put a bow on that thing real quick. All right, let's move this thing along because we got a couple more things that I want to get to. We're out here at 29's Kitchen Bar in Clarence, the Whirly Golf Dome, Whirly Drive. You're a regular here, more so in the winter when you're working on your golf game. You post your scores when they're going great. You don't necessarily post them when they're going bad. Let's see
They're going bad. That's why. Why post something that doesn't happen?
I follow you on Instagram. I see a lot of pictures and facial expressions, so I know that it's not always great. Yeah.
It's way worse on camera.
They've done a great job here. Obviously, inside the dome, you can come out here, hang out, play a round of golf, just hit some golf balls. We did that last time. Out here on the patio, it is absolutely beautiful, beautiful Buffalo evening. It's the place to be. Come spend an evening.
Yeah, $5 pints, $2 off chicken items tonight.
And we got something coming up in a couple days. Why don't you tell them a little bit about that?
Oh, next weekend, right? Yeah, Mafia Con.
No, Ryan, 7/16 day. We can get to Mafia Con as well.
All right,
Come
7/16 day. We said wheeze. Yeah, 7/16 day. Come on out. A lot going on here at the Golf Dome. Matt, tell us a little bit about what they can do here.
What can they do here, Ryan? You were talking to Chuck. That's your department. I was literally lobbing it up. Okay, so here's the thing.
Or outside?
Here's the thing. Inside or outside, but here's the thing. Something we didn't touch on at the start, which I'm not surprised that he didn't bring it up, but we played a little bit of life-size beer pong before we started tonight. They got the cans set up over there, and how it works is the cans are set up in they're huge, like garbage totes. And here we go. We got the info. Chuck, thank you so much, Chuck. They got the totes set up out there, and what you do is you take a couple soccer balls, and they act as the ping pong balls, and you got to throw them across the parking lot, and you got to nail it, and you got to sink. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 of them.
You ever play beer pong? Come on. Listen. Well, first of all,
maybe I haven't, but I think I won, Talbot.
Well, you're leaving out an important detail, a very important detail. The game is under protest. First of all, Bills Mafia. I would love it in the comments. How many re-racks do you get in a game of beer pong? You get 1.
Re-racks?
You've never played with
I play.
You get 1 re-rack. I'm a Bondas guy. Trust me. You get 1. 1 per game.
Okay, wait. Are you saying that you were looking for a re-rack and didn't get it?
Absolutely. He denied.
Oh, no, he's playing Vegas rules. That's why. You got to remember, he lived in Vegas. Vegas is it's hardcore. You're not getting re-racks.
Oh, I don't want you using the rims, dude. That's what you try to do. You got to sink it where they got to be separated. None of that.
Terrible.
And I didn't need it, and I won. So there you have it. Why don't you read off that little sheet there? Let everybody know what's coming up.
Absolutely. First annual 7/16 day starting at 5:30 p.m. Portion of the proceeds go to their great friends at DSPGWNY. Buffalo Car Care supporting with high-end car show, golf headquarters giveaways, and a putting contest, as well as live music featuring Tim Britt.
My man Tim Britt.
That's right. Labatt will have some beer samples here as well.
Tim Britt's very good. I'm not good at putting. It's the weakest part of my game. But I'll still beat Parrino, no problem.
Ooh.
Here's the thing. You would, but I would never play you unless we were playing in a scramble. I'm a scramble player.
Right, so you could see the putt 3 times before you go.
Okay. That's correct, but don't say that into the microphone. I like to hit it off the tee, and I like to operate on the green. I don't like anything in between, and I think that rhymed.
Yeah, you would be the drive for show. I'm more of the putt for dough guy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
we should team up actually.
I don't know. This much hair on one roster would be a lot. I'm not sure this is really fit for public consumption, but
here's what nobody's ready for. Watch this guy off the tee. Okay. He is blowing you. No, at the end, you were driving. Dude, it's all coming back to you. You haven't golfed in a couple years.
Well, listen, while these guys were boosting their egos, a few other things. There's some kids face painting, some glitter art, and also some balloon animals from 5:30 to 7:30. So stop on down, 716 day at the Whirly Golf Dome.
You did a great job on that read. Usually I have to do the reads on the show. I like this. I like this new development. You starting to kind of pitch in in that area. So good job. Let's move on to the Bills. Back to the Bills. We talked about the concerning areas. What's an area of the roster that you feel like either position group or player that you feel like this offseason is just kind of getting slept on a little bit and is going to have a little bit more of an impact than people realize?
I think probably the cornerback room. I know I agree with Ryan. It doesn't have the depth that it's traditionally had. You don't have the Dane Jacksons. You don't have some of these guys that you're like, maybe we don't want him as a full-time starter, but man, if something goes wrong, the break in case of emergency, they've always really kind of had a good situation. Obviously, Dane Jackson leaves this offseason, but I think Rasul Douglas looked about as good as any player could look walking in off of the street after being traded at the deadline and then leading the team in interceptions. I mean, he looked the instinctual type players, for whatever reason, really tend to do well in Sean McDermott's system. It's what I think makes Christian Benford a really good NFL player. Is I'm not sure how many other NFL franchises Benford would have been drafted in the 6th round and then walked in and basically been a day one starter. But I think in this system, with how Sean McDermott protects corners, largely they've been protected by a safety duo that knows how to get in out of checks. But I really like them as a duo, as two perimeter defenders. I'm really interested to see what Kyer Elam, if he's their new Dane Jackson, if they want to run more man coverage this year, you could absolutely see Kyer Elam moving into the lineup and having Christian Benford come out, or moving into the lineup and seeing Rasul Douglas come out. I don't think either outside corner is set up to play 100% of the snaps this year. They love to rotate defensive linemen, but if they feel they've got a matchup, and they want to see Kyer go out there and run more press man, they could absolutely do that. So I think they've got some flexibility there. And I think, right up there with Trent McDuffie, that Taron Johnson's one of the best slot corners in the entire NFL. And I think part of the reason why NFL defenses are moving so much more towards a base nickel defense are players like Taron Johnson, who have the ability to be a really strong run defender, physical players, but are also, fantastic zone defenders as well in the pass game. So that versatility is, I think, really important for them. I'm really interested to see how they're going to use Cole Bishop. I know he's not a corner, but do they figure out ways to get him involved in the slot as well, and run some dime looks instead of, having Jordan Poyer in those looks? Will they maybe, bring a guy like Cole Bishop into those looks as well? So really interested. I think it's an under talked about group on the team. I want to preface it with saying, I'd like to see them maybe grab a veteran. We're going to see what Ingram has going to training camp. They've got 10-point-something million. I know his position group of concern is defensive end, and maybe they address that with the cap space. Stephon Gilmore's still on the street. Yeah. Someone like that, it wouldn't shock me if the Bills decide we're not totally comfortable with the depth in this room and we want to upgrade it.
Do you think Gilmore would come back to Buffalo not being guaranteed a starting job?
Probably not, but I think it's somebody like that, a guy that's been around the league a little while, that's got experience, maybe has some scheme versatility, man, zone. So I'm super interested in the conversation of what happens with the defensive backfield in general. I think PFF just had them as like the 3rd or 4th best defensive backfield, and I'm like, I'm high on them. I don't know that I'm that high. I don't know what they've got at safety right now. What is Mike Edwards in a full-time role? What is Taylor Rapp in a full-time role? Is Cole Bishop going to walk in off the street like a lot of draft prognosticators have said and be a day one safety? These are questions that we probably won't have answers to until the first year. And because of that, I don't know that as a whole group, I'm like bought in as this is a top 5 unit, but I think they're very strong at the top level of strength for them defensively.
No, I think you raise a lot of really good points. For me, it was the depth that concerned me. It was almost my choice for the positional group that worries me the most. But at the top, they're solid. They've always had a history of bringing players in where you say, oh, this team's really in trouble. And all of a sudden, a guy shows up and performs really well. I mean, we've talked about Jamarcus Ingram a few years ago against the Dolphins. Everyone was going down, and he had to play significant reps, and he looked the part against a really good wide receiver unit, one of the best in the league. So I feel like that can carry over into this year. The safety position is very interesting to me. Is it going to be Mike Edwards? Are they going to go with Taylor Rapp? How quickly is Cole Bishop going to get out there on the field? But we've seen this unit time and time again, the secondary as a whole, perform well. It's going to be a lot different without that safety duo that made life a lot easier for the cornerbacks.
I was kind of looking at you because I thought you were going to pick up the mantle and go into your most slept on position.
Yeah, I think it's the offensive line. The more I think about this unit, the more I really like it. And I would say, pound for pound, Aaron Kromer might be the best offensive line coach in the NFL right now. We've seen him bring guys along.
Joe Brady thinks so.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. We've seen, guys last year, Alec Anderson, Ryan Vandermark, develop significantly in their second years, find spots on this roster. You have guys on the practice squad that I think Richard Grage, for instance, could push for a depth role. But in terms of the starting unit, I really like it from left to right. Deion Dawkins is still playing at a high level. Left guard, we'll see what they do. I think David Edwards is kind of that penciled-in starter. They drafted Cedric Van Pran Granger. They've talked about him having the versatility to play both spots. And then you have Connor McGovern. At first, I was a little iffy about that move. I would like to have seen him stay at left guard because of what that would have meant for Deion Dawkins. But he's saying this is his natural position, the wingspan, the size, more prototypical for a center position. And then on the right side, they just have some maulers. Osiris Torrance in year 2. I think that he was a guy that just no one nationally talked about him, which is usually a good thing for an offensive lineman. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think that the praise came at the end of the season that he deserved, the flowers, so to speak. He was outstanding for this unit. And then you have Spencer Brown, who he was healthy last year. He played at an elite level. And, oh, by the way, he's playing for a contract. So from left to right, love the starting unit, love the depth that they have on this team and the competition that we're going to see at training camp.
I love the contract year for Brown, like getting him in this season, this important season, knowing that you have continuity on the offensive line. You have a huge year for him. And also, I think Torrance is going to be maybe the most improved player on this Bills roster. And to me, where do you look as like the big gain if those two guys play at the level that they could? It's the running game, right? Like I talked about James Cook as being like maybe a concern, but in the run game, him, Davis, Johnson, like I think they're going to pick up just where they left off last year running the football. But I want to go back to the defensive side of the ball and say who I think, one player that I think is being slept on more than anybody, and that's somebody that I thought really through the first 10 weeks last year had a breakout season. And that Terrell Bernard could be it. It's not it, but that's a good guess. I'm going with Ed Oliver. And I'm going with Ed Oliver because I think the Bills miscalculated last season. I think they thought, okay, Ed Oliver is going into this huge year. We just paid him. We can put all of dinner, dessert, drinks, all of it on the plate, and he's going to be able to clean it. It was too much. By the end of the year, they were having him play 80-90% of the snaps. And you could tell in the playoffs, the dude was just absolutely gassed. I think they went out and they got some veterans this year. Austin Johnson, Williams, they brought over from the Broncos. They drafted Dwayne Carter. I think there's a bunch of players now that they're better set up. Like Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle, let's be honest. Like they just didn't hit the mark. That I think the idea was sound. I think what they brought them here to be, they just didn't live up to the expectation. They're re-rolling the dice here, and I think they're better set up to give Ed Oliver a chance to be a 60 to 70% of the snaps guy, stay a little bit more healthy, conditioning to be at the level that they need him to be. I think Oliver's going to have a huge year, and I think it actually tempers the anxiety that I have at the edge rusher position because I think Ed Oliver is going to really lead this defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, Ed had a pretty amazing season last year, career year, the year after he gets paid. Usually that happens the year they're going to get paid. So he mistimed that a little bit. But I think that the conversation last offseason about, him getting the contract that he got, when it happened immediately, I thought this is going to look like an insane bargain in 2 years. And it's 1 year later. And I do think it's a bargain. Listen, I mean, they had some tough decisions to make last offseason. They let Tremaine Edmonds walk, right? And I think if you were to ask me last year, who would you rather have, Tremaine Edmonds or Ed Oliver? I would have had a tough time getting that Oliver. I think in hindsight, which is always 2020, right? Like I look at it and I say, man, thank God Brandon Beane makes the money and not me, because I probably would have kept Edmonds. And to me, Ed Oliver was a far and clear away the right choice to bring back in. And then, I mean, he basically went from being a top 9, top 10 paid player at his position. By the end of the offseason last year, after he got paid, he closer to 15, 16 after Quinnen Williams got paid. And then obviously this offseason, he's outside the top 25 and per year numbers for defensive tackles. His production meets that value. And in another offseason and another defensive tackle or 3 gets paid, it's going to look even better. And he's still a young player. And I still think he is ascending. And he hasn't really met sort of that peak of his career yet. So, I love the choice there. I personally would have went Terrell Bernard, who I think was one of the best linebackers in the NFL last year. And we only got to see him in 4.5. Who's the jokester on Fox Sports? Craig Carton.
Or Carmen, as Parrino called him.
That was our Tuesday show, and I called him Carmen during the whole thing. But what's the difference?
He doesn't deserve to have his name pronounced properly. I mean, his takes about, take that with a grain of salt. That's a Jet Spaces. Great guys and gals all along, but man, they are detached from reality. And he is sort of and I think for me, like they should be better defensively if they're all healthy, but they have the best linebacker duo, especially with Javon Greenlaw going out in the Super Bowl, and you don't have that going back in San Francisco. I think they are head above heels the best linebacker duo in the league. The thing that makes them, how about this? Everybody's talked about how dynamic the safeties have been in this defense since they came over, right? And the interchangeability of them being able to play too high. Each of them can play in the box. Each of them can do different things. Is there more versatility in a group of linebackers in the NFL than Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard? I mean, both of them are A+ pass rushers and blitzers. Both of them are A+ pass defenders. Both of them make big plays when big plays are required. So I think Bernard is up and coming. So yeah, I listen. Oliver, not at all. I couldn't be more excited what they have in a healthy linebacker duo to start the year.
Yeah, and one last thing at Oliver. When he started the year so strong, I said, well, it's the DaQuan Jones factor. And then he goes down in Jacksonville, and he just continues to ascend. So to your point, he's still scratching the surface on what kind of player he can be. I don't think he's come close to hitting that ceiling yet. So that's a great choice, Matt.
I think your point about DaQuan Jones, it only, I think, creates more opportunity because I am not here to tell you that I think DaQuan Jones is going to match the production we saw before the injury last year. I mean, if you look at some of those charts where you have, pass rush win rate and compared to a double team rate, he was more efficient as just as an every down one tech than Aaron Donald was. Right. He was getting double teamed at a higher rate and seeing higher success than Aaron Donald was early in the season. And if you have to double team DaQuan Jones, which I think that's the hope and why they brought him back, is if he can sort of be the guy that takes on those double teams, you are freeing Ed Oliver up he's going to win a ton of one-on-one matchups on an interior part of a defensive line. He's too quick. His technique is too solid. And he has now, I feel like the same conversation we'll eventually have about Greg Rousseau is the same conversation we're having about Ed Oliver right now, which is he came in raw and he won at college with his athleticism. He was a difficult person to block at the college level because he just had things and had possessed traits that not a lot of guys in that position have. He's small. He's, he can just move. In the NFL, he has all those same traits, but now he's developed a plan at the line of scrimmage. And that's what we've heard Von Miller talk about with Greg Rousseau is, man, when that guy can figure out his plan pre and post snap when he's at the line of scrimmage, that's where I think if DaQuan Jones and Dwayne Carter and some of these other pieces that they brought in to solidify the interior part of their defensive line can free him up to see less double teams, which I think his play got better last year when he saw an increase in double team rate, which I, like Ryan, was not expecting. So if he can be that guy that only sees a double team, 15, 20% of the snaps, he's going to be super productive and continue ascending.
Yeah, and one last thing on the slept upon positions, I think linebacker could be considered because there are some people that don't know if Matt Milano will return to form, and we saw what Terrell Bernard did last year, and he came out of nowhere. Matt, we talked at the end of training camp. We had no idea who was going to start opposite Matt Milano.
We didn't know until week 1.
Right?
They had no idea who was going to start linebacker.
And for Bernard, it was a little bit of injury, bad luck. He would miss some time late in the stretch. He said, "Who's it going to be?" But for the depth of linebacker, I think Dorian Williams kind of fits into what you were just talking about, those athletic, raw players that won at college. We saw in year 1 with Terrell Bernard, he kind of looked a little bit lost when he was put out on the field. Dorian Williams at times looked a little bit lost out there on the field. I think in year 2, digesting this system, understanding it, the Bills have a third option if they want to play 3 linebacker sets, if they need to give one of those guys a breather. Williams can come in and play a bigger factor than maybe some people are expecting.
I was listening to a podcast. I want to pull it up because I don't want to misrepresent them. I actually think I was going back to look at some of your wild takes, and I came upon you retweeting it. It's called Bootleg Football. That's their podcast, and it's with I want to make sure I get it right. Brett Coleman, who I think does a great job over on Twitter. They did an entire Bills episode. It's about 40 minutes long, or maybe like an hour. And one of the takeaways, they crush a lot of film. They do a lot of draft work. Brett was talking about how high he is on Eddie Ulofoshio. He had him as his number 3 linebacker in this entire draft off the ball. So if you think about that, you bring up Dorian Williams. You think about Matt Milano, who's in that huge contract and is probably going to be, 2 years removed from wanting to kind of find that replacement. To me, Ulofoshio is now in the system. Couldn't have landed in a better spot to be able to develop him. They got a couple of really interesting options there with Tyrell Dotson now in Seattle, with Williams and now Ulofoshio. I'm out on Bale Inspector. I'm out on Bale Inspector. Guy can't stay on the field. I like him personally, every interaction that I've had with him, but I can't factor him into the plans because every time there's any kind of momentum, and I'm talking about 2 days, 3 days, a week, he's hurt.
Nick Morrow's
in the mix, and I thought Deion Jones looked really good. I mean, he's more of like a middle linebacker backup kind of guy, but Morrow can play special teams. They got some linebackers.
They learned their lesson. They got burned last year. What was the position the year before that they got burned on? Oh gosh, was it corner? No, they got burned.
No, it was corner because Dane Jackson got hurt, and they were down to who were they? Yeah, Ingram had to play in that one game.
And they brought in Josh Norman.
Yeah, right. So
we're good with no more Josh Norman at this point, by the way. And I'm not saying that from a personal perspective at all. Maybe I am.
They tend to, okay, so this is a Brandon Beane quote. I'm paraphrasing. You tend to make a lot of offseason decisions based on your last game. And their last game had AJ Klein running around trying to cover Travis Kelce, who, 5 weeks before the conversation was, is Travis Kelce going to hang it up? He wasn't looking like the same player. He was too, concerned about spending the bye week in Paris with Taylor Swift. And then it very quickly turned into, okay, this guy's still got it.
And then, wait for it, did he shake it off?
Boo. Boo. Oh, the patio's booing, man.
Kennedy, where are you? Is she in here? Did you hear that? Shake it off? Shake it off? Yeah. Oh, she said, blah.
Here's the tough part: is your daughter has secondhand embarrassment now from you, so that's tough. Your wife didn't even turn around, so
I'm gonna shake it off and move right along here to the final topic that I wanted to spend some time with you. So I was on with Bulldog today on the drive over, and he said, "Oh, you guys are gonna do the show tonight," and I was like, "Yeah." One of the things I want to cover with Nate is like this newfound love affair that he seems to have with Tua Tagovailoa, and the more we've talked about it, the more I'm starting to wonder, is it like a bit? Is it like a real thing? Because I think I found a tweet of you saying that Tua is the top 10 quarterback in the NFL, and I'd like to hear you expand upon that a little bit. I heard a no way in the crowd, and I can't say that I don't disagree.
I think Tua's got a lot of Kirk Cousins vibes. I think he's modern day Kirk Cousins, and Kirk end up making more than just about any quarterback in his era, right? Yeah, I think there's kind of a disingenuous conversation around Tua. Listen, do I think he's got a good arm, an NFL arm? No, I don't. But he can throw a deep with the receivers he has as good as anyone. I mean, the guy can throw it up in the air and has got 2-4-2 guys that can just go run and go get it. I think on his first read, he's probably but when you ask him to get to the second, third, fourth, fifth read, he's bottom 5. And that variation is difficult for consistency, which is what you see. And then you're relying a lot on Mike McDaniels to come up with things that defenses haven't seen. And eventually that is run out. The last 2 years, it's run out. They've gotten off to hot starts, and then they fizzle off by the end of the season when there's a lot of film. You can't hold all the good wrinkles to the end of the season. So where I am with Tua is I would love for the Dolphins to pay him $65 million. I think he is a good enough quarterback to win you 10, 11 games in the NFL. I don't think Tua is ever going to win a playoff game. I don't think they're going to win a Super Bowl with Tua. But the Dolphins are in this unenviable position of, I think, one that every franchise probably fears is a quarterback that is just good enough. Quarterbacks that are Tua, the Kirk Cousins. Those are the guys they only become available, right? So I think I answered a lot of questions last year. I mean, he is number 1 in most passing categories, and I'm not going to ignore it. But I also think that he has to have a lot of things going right for him, where the Mahomes, and now we're going to see it in time with Josh Allen, is when you have a quarterback that you're paying $40, $50, $60 million to, you've got to make roster sacrifices. And Kansas City had Rashee Rice and an aging Travis Kelce, and now this year they draft Xavier Worthy and they go inside Hollywood Brown. So they've, even after they won the Super Bowl. So I think they're going to go the Mahomes route and say, we think you're the type of quarterback that should be able to win a Super Bowl without a true number 1 wide receiver. And it's been done before. And if anybody could do it, it's Josh Allen. But Tua's, I have a lot of Dolphins friends. So if I blink, it's because somebody's threatening me behind closed doors. So I have a lot of Dolphins friends. I like a dozen or so friends that are full Tua hive, Tuanon, full believers, and much like Jets fans, just unhinged from reality. They just do not have a real firm grasp on what real life is like. But Tua's not bad. He's Kirk Cousins light.
Okay. So to me, Ryan, Tua is the most interesting storyline in the NFL that we're going to see over the next 6 to 7 weeks, because they're up against it right now. Like, I was listening to Mike Giannetti, does a great podcast over at Spot Track. I was listening to his episode today, and he was talking about, they were talking about whether or not Tua is going to play week 1 if he doesn't get a contract. And Mike's prediction is that he won't. Ooh. That if he doesn't get the new contract, he will sit out and he will not play.
A Chris Jones, but a quarterback.
Exactly. Which I think is all types of interesting, because if you're the Dolphins, like, how can you sit there and give him the Trevor Lawrence deal knowing that he's had this 4-year window? You've had all of these injury problems. You've taken now what I think is going to be a step back on defense, and you're going to need the offense to really carry the organization. I don't think that he can, and I have serious concerns about Tyreek Hill. I've talked about it for the last couple of years. He's about to fall off a cliff. That speed does not last into your 30s. And maybe I'll be proven wrong, but once that thing goes and you're now paying $20+ million to an aging wide receiver, and all of a sudden that offense doesn't look the same way, what do you do?
Yeah, I think Tua is a middle of the pack quarterback for the record. And if he did ever sit out, that's the fastest way to get a fan base to turn on you. But, if you're trying to get money, I understand that. If I'm the Dolphins, I don't budge on this. I'm not getting top quarterback money. I don't think he's worth that. You talked, and I agree with you. The Dolphins aren't going to be in position to draft one of the top quarterbacks in next year's draft. But I think Mike McDaniel, to his credit, schemes things up better than most offensive coordinator, head coaches in the NFL. So he could find a guy on day 2, late on day 1, that he thinks this guy can fit my scheme. We can win with the guys that we have. We're going to have him on a rookie contract. We're going to load up elsewhere. If they end up giving Tua that kind of contract, the 50s, 60s, they're going to end up regretting that, much like the Giants are with Daniel Jones.
Isn't it amazing, though? Like, he has to be sitting there watching the 49ers, even though they've gone to 2 Super Bowls with Kyle Shanahan. It's been hard. They haven't been able to get over the hump. And I think going that route, the Jimmy Garoppolos of the world, the Brock Purdy, to me, you have a very hard ceiling in tough games. Like, listen, they're a player or 2 away from not making it to the Super Bowl in both of those years. And the quarterback play, once they've gotten to the playoffs, hasn't been great. So can they operate that way? Yes. But I think you might almost be in a position where you have to pay Tua because you know what the upside is. And you're almost just trying to figure out how to make it more prevalent longer and into the hard months, which I don't know if Tua is ever going to be able to get over that hump against good defenses, against good defensive head coaches in elements, weather elements. It's if you're a Buffalo Bills fan, you're pulling up a seat and you're absolutely excited about watching how this plays out.
A huge mistake by Chris Greer is letting Trevor Lawrence get paid before Tua, because you're not going to pay Tua what Trevor Lawrence got paid. You have to pay him more. I mean, he's got significantly better numbers, more success than Trevor Lawrence has had. That, you know, the Dolphins are in a place of leverage, and well, if Tua doesn't sign, then we'll just go get a guy in day 2 of the draft. We'll go get a guy. We'll trade up and mortgage our future and maybe try to trade up. But Chris Greer, they don't have the luxury to do that. First of all, if they decide that they're not going to budge and they're just going to let Tua walk, that fan base will revolt. Chris Greer has done just enough to keep his job. And I think that you are, again, it's an enviable position to me, because if you pay him, you're not going to win. And if you don't pay him, you're not going to win. But you're going to have a very angry fan base. And, you know, they're in a win now roster. They didn't win when Tua was on the rookie deal, and he is not good enough to win on a $60 million a year contract. So, yeah, I mean, could they have gone and got Kirk Cousins, and would they have been better for it? I don't know. How many guys, though, to your point about Mike McDaniels, he'll just scheme it up. That Mike McDaniels in his scheme requires a certain type of quarterback, and Tua is a very good fit for that system. There are very few quarterbacks that walk off the bus from playing college with the unique ability as an anticipatory thrower like Tua is, to walk in and be successful day one. Most college quarterbacks don't walk into the NFL being able to throw with the type of he's made it there because he's had to make up the arm strength deficiencies with being a really strong timing and rhythm thrower. And he hasn't been able to build the next step on that. He hasn't been able to build because he doesn't have the arm strength. Is Josh Allen if he's in Mike McDaniel's system? Would you even want Mike McDaniel's system with Josh Allen? I don't think so. Unless he dramatically changed it, right? A lot of people talk about Josh Allen wouldn't be great in Kyle Shanahan's system, and I kind of believe that. Like, that's not what's going to set him up for success. So to me, they are just in this impossible position. They're going to pay him. They're going to pay him more than Trevor Lawrence, and Chris Greer is going to be looking for a head scouting job for years. That's going to be the reality of the situation.
All right, Ryan, final thought.
Final thought, come on out here to the Whirly Golf Dome, 716 Day, Bills Mafia. Great atmosphere, rain or shine. If it's raining inside at the Golf Dome, if it's outside, you can come out here to the patio.
It is a great time to become a Shout Buffalo Bills insider, 716-528-6727. All right.
Is there a number?
Yeah, that's my number. Are you surprised that I'm giving it out on the podcast?
Yeah.
You could text me right now, 716-528-6727. Send a text. You'll get a text back. Then you put in your credit card. And when you put in your credit card, you become a Shout Buffalo Bills insider. But before you do that, before you have to pay anything, it's a 2-week free trial. And you get access to Matt Parrino 24/7, 365. And I sent out the schedule for the next week. We're going to have positional breakdowns on the Insider text line every single day, all the way up until training camp. And then when we get there, oh, the gloves come off, Ryan. We're going to be all day, every day, as much as we can give you from St. John Fisher University. Excuse me. Give it up for Nate Geary in the house for coming out and joining us today. So I was talking this with Chuck, this announcement that we were doing this on Facebook today. One of his comments was, you had me all the way up until Nate Geary. But the best part was that it was kind of a shot at Nate, right?
Yeah.
Nate liked the comment. Nate put a little heart on it. And I got to say, you are a friend.
I'm not going to give out my cell phone number, so don't ask for that. Although nowadays, you probably just find it online.
I'll give it to you. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, Talbot would try to give that out because he's been trying to police me on I appreciate the invite. I always love coming out and hanging out with you guys, talking Bills, and this is a great facility. Maybe I'm biased, I mean, I come on. Now I be out here in the summertime too, and whatnot when I'm just working on my golf game, but when I see $1 wing Wednesdays, and do I see a steam clam deal going on plus lunch? Yeah, I'm not kidding. I pulled into the parking lot and I saw the speakers. It's like, are they doing this out back? What's out back? I had no idea this was here. This is like an awesome space, like especially for like, I'm sure they probably have some like private event space back here. This is an awesome space to party. And listen, I mean, I may have never been called a stand-up guy, but I've definitely been called a partier, and I would definitely come back here and party any day. So
it's awesome out here at 29's Kitchen Bar inside the Whirly Golf Dome. For Ryan Talbot, Nate Geary, I'm Matt Parrino. See you soon. Take care, everybody.